night, where the moonlight glows. Zombies lurking everywhere, that's how the story goes. Grab your gear, hold on tight, it's a wild ride ahead.
Welcome to the Zombie Story Zone, where dark tales come alive and the undead don't just stumble, they think, plan, and hunt. Tonight, we bring you a chilling story set in the 17th century in a small village called Ravencross, shrouded in fog and fear. In this world, the dead don't simply rise. They remember who they were. They organize, plot, and seek to break the boundary between life and death. Isabella Thorncroft, a young healer, faces a terrifying truth when her lost love, Captain Edward Grey, returns from the sea, changed, haunted, and caught between worlds. As whispers of the Crimson Moon spread, Isabella must uncover dark secrets hidden beneath the village chapel and confront a deadly circle of undead led by a noblewoman lost to time. With the fate of the living and the dead hanging in the balance, love, sacrifice, and cunning become the only weapons against a rising darkness. Join us as we dive deep into Whispers of the Crimson Moon, a story of romance, suspense, and zombie horror unlike any other. Stay close, because in this zone, the dead are never truly gone.
Oh, every story's a thrill, come and let your courage show. Fight or flight, we'll unite as the horror unfolds.
The sea always brought stories to Ravencross. Some came in on the tide, others in the screams of gulls, or the silence that followed a ship lost to the waves. In the year 1672, the silence grew louder. Ravencross was a small fishing village on the coast of England, wrapped in cold fog and fear. The air smelled of salt and secrets. Every cottage leaned into the next, as if hiding from something unseen. The villagers said prayers, but their eyes held questions. Isabella Thorncroft walked the cobbled streets with a lantern in her hand and a hole in her heart. Her beloved, Captain Edward Grey, had vanished 3 months ago with his ship, the Black Valor. No sails were seen again. No bodies found, only the wind told tales, and it whispered his name. But 2 nights ago, on the cliffs above the sea, Isabella saw a figure standing in the mist. He was tall, soaked from head to toe, and looked just like Edward. He turned his head slowly, his eyes glowed faint red, and then he was gone. Since that moment, Isabella couldn't sleep. The air around the village grew colder. People began to disappear. And the moon, once silver, now rose crimson in the sky. The dead, they said, were walking. But worse still, some were remembering, and they had plans. The year was 1672, and the village of Ravencross sat like a forgotten ghost on the edge of the sea. The days were short, the nights longer, and the fog never seemed to leave. It wrapped around the cottages like cold fingers, muffling sounds and stealing warmth from the air. Fishermen no longer sang as they cast their nets. Children were kept indoors after dark. Even the church bells rang softer, as if afraid to disturb something sleeping. They said it was just the changing seasons. But deep down, everyone felt it. Something was wrong. Isabella Thorncroft walked the damp, uneven stones of the village path, a brass lantern swinging from her hand. Her brown cloak clung to her shoulders, damp from the sea mist. She had lived in Ravencross her whole life. Her father was the village physician, a wise but tired man. Since her mother died of fever years ago, Isabella had learned to read herbs, mix tonics, and comfort the sick. But now, she needed comfort herself. 3 months ago, her love, Captain Edward Grey, sailed away on the Black Valor, a merchant ship bound for the West Indies. He promised to return by spring. Instead, only silence came back with the waves. Until 2 nights ago. Isabella had wandered up the cliff path, as she often did, hoping for a sign. There, near the jagged rocks where the waves crashed violently below, she saw him, Edward. He stood barefoot on the edge of the cliff, his soaked coat flapping in the wind. His face, pale and still, was lit by the red moon above. His eyes glowed faintly like embers in a dying fire. She whispered his name. He turned, slowly, like someone waking from a long sleep. Then he vanished into the mist. Since that night, the fog had grown thicker. The sea sounded like it was whispering, and Isabella began to hear things in the wind, her name, and voices that did not belong to the living. The days grew quieter after Isabella saw Edward on the cliffs. Even the birds seemed to leave the village. The only sound was the sea, sighing like an old man in his sleep. People began to change. Old Bram, the cooper, stopped smiling at the children. He no longer greeted anyone at the market. Then he disappeared. His door was left open, his tools still lying on the bench. 3 children vanished from the edge of the woods. They had been chasing fireflies, their laughter echoing into the trees. No one ever heard it again. Fear gripped Ravencross like a fist. Some villagers said it was wolves, others blamed pirates. But Isabella knew something darker was moving in the mist. She tried to speak to Father Oswin, the village priest. He listened, eyes wide, face pale. "You saw a man long dead," he said softly. "That is no man now, child. The devil walks in stolen flesh." But Isabella didn't believe Edward was evil. Something inside her said he was still in there, trapped, suffering, trying to come home. That night, long after the candles had burned low, a knock came at her door. Not loud, not frantic, just soft, steady, like fingers tapping gently on wood. She opened it with shaking hands. Edward stood there. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed, but the shape of his mouth, the curl of his dark hair, it was him. His coat was torn and wet, boots coated in black mud. "Izzy," he said, his voice rough like wind scraping across stone. She reached for him, her heart full of pain and hope. "You're alive!" He stepped inside but paused at the threshold, eyes darting left and right down the empty street. "Not quite," he whispered. Not like before. Edward stood by the fire, his body stiff and slow. Water dripped from his coat onto the wooden floor. Isabella's hands trembled as she poured him tea, though she knew he might not even drink it. He didn't. Instead, he stared into the flames, as if trying to remember how to feel their warmth. "I shouldn't have come," he said at last, his voice low and broken. "But I needed to see you, to warn you." "Warn me," Isabella's heart pounded. "Edward, what happened out there? Where did you go?" He looked at her then. His eyes, once green and full of life, were darker now, almost black, with a faint red glow deep inside. "We were lost at sea for weeks. Then we found an island. It wasn't on any map. It shouldn't have been there." He paused, as if the memory hurt more than his wounds. There were voices in the trees, statues that bled when touched, and a stone buried in the sand that hummed with something ancient, something alive. "We dug it up." Isabella felt her breath catch. "It was called the Crimson Seed," Edward said. "It wasn't a plant. It was an infection of the mind. It burrowed into our thoughts. The dead on that island rose, not like beasts, but with purpose. They whispered to us, taught us." "Taught you what?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "How to wait, how to hide, how to plan." Isabella stepped back. "You're one of them?" He nodded slowly. "But not fully. Not yet. I'm still fighting it. I don't hunger for flesh, not like the others. I remember who I am. I remember you." He reached out, his cold fingers brushing hers. "Izzy, I came because they are coming, not as monsters, but as something worse." "Worse?" she asked, afraid of the answer. Edward's voice dropped to a whisper. "They can think." After Edward's warning, Isabella barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of wind made her jump. But she couldn't send him away. Not yet. Not when he still looked at her with the same love, even if that love now hid behind cold skin and haunted eyes. The village continued to change. Dogs barked at empty alleys. Livestock broke through fences, running for the woods and never returning. People whispered about shadows moving across their windows at night. No one saw who or what made them. Then one night, Edward stood by her window, watching the fog drift through the village. "They're gathering," he said quietly. "They meet in the forest where no light reaches. I must go. I have to know what they're planning." "You'll come back?" she asked, his jaw tightened. "If I can." And then he was gone, swallowed by the mist. Isabella waited an hour, then grabbed her cloak and lantern. She followed the forest path, heart racing. She moved slowly, careful not to step on dry branches. The trees loomed tall and silent, as if holding their breath. After a while, she saw the glow. Red, like embers burning in a circle. She crept closer, staying behind a thick oak tree. What she saw made her blood turn to ice. A dozen figures stood in a ring around a black stone that pulsed like a beating heart. They didn't groan or stumble like mindless beasts. They stood straight, still, watching, thinking. Among them was Edward. But he wasn't the leader. A woman stepped into the light. Her long black hair flowed like water, and her skin was as pale as moonlight. Cracks ran along her arms like broken porcelain. Her eyes burned like coals. Isabella gasped softly. She had seen paintings of that face in the manor ruins. Lady Arabella, the noblewoman who drowned 5 years ago. The dead weren't just rising. They were remembering who they had been. Isabella tried to step back, but her foot snapped a twig beneath her. Every figure in the crimson-lit circle turned. Eyes glowed red. Heads tilted, not in confusion, but in calculation. Then Edward's voice rang out. "Run, Izzy!" Too late. Two figures, one with a broken jaw, the other missing an eye, moved faster than any corpse should. They grabbed her arms. Their grip was ice and iron. She was dragged into the circle. The woman at the center smiled. Her face was cracked, but elegant, beautiful in a haunting way. "Isabella Thorncroft," she said softly, her voice like velvet over glass, the living heart of a dead man. "Who are you?" Isabella asked, trembling. The woman stepped closer. "I was Lady Arabella Whitmore, drowned by her husband and left to rot at sea. But the sea gave me back with a gift." She pointed at the black stone pulsing at their feet. "The crimson seed is not death. It is rebirth, mind over muscle, strategy over screams." Edward stood frozen, his fists clenched. "She doesn't belong here," he said. "Let her go." Arabella turned to him. "You still cling to love. That is your weakness." Then she looked back at Isabella. "You, child, are the key to the door." "What door?" Isabella asked. Arabella raised a pale hand. "Beneath your chapel is an ancient ruin, older than the church, older than the village. There lies a gate, a boundary between what was and what will be." Edward stepped forward. "They want to open it, to bring through others, things far worse than us." Arabella smiled wider. "And your love for her is the final spark, one soul alive, one half dead. Together, you can tear the veil." "Izzy," Edward said, his voice shaking, "you must run. Now." Arabella raised her hand, and the circle began to chant in a language not spoken by man. The stone pulsed faster, and Isabella's vision blurred as the forest spun, and a deep, ancient whisper echoed in her mind. Isabella woke on the cold floor of the chapel, her head pounding like a drum. Rain tapped against the stained glass windows. The red moon still hung in the sky outside. She didn't know how she had escaped. Edward must have carried her. Her fingers brushed something in her pocket, a scrap of paper, torn, scrawled in Edward's hand. "Beneath the altar, burn the gate." She rose on shaky legs and lit a candle. Shadows danced on the stone walls as she made her way to the altar. The wooden cross above it looked older than the church itself. She pushed the altar aside. Nothing. Then her foot caught a groove in the floor. She pressed it. With a soft click, a trapdoor opened. The smell that came up was old, older than death, like wet stone and forgotten things. She climbed down the crumbling steps with her lantern held high. The passage twisted and narrowed. Strange symbols marked the walls. Red spirals, sharp runes, eyes without pupils. At the bottom, she found it. The gate. It stood taller than a man, made of blackened bone and dark stone. Crimson veins pulsed across its surface as if it were alive. Before it, placed like an offering, lay the crimson seed, pulsing, glowing, waiting. A whisper tickled her ear, though she was alone. "Touch it, and he will be yours forever." She reached for it, then stopped. Voices echoed behind her. Arabella and the others were coming. She had minutes. She pulled the flask of lamp oil from her cloak. Her hands shook as she poured it across the floor, around the gate and over the stone. Then she struck her flint. The flame caught fast. A scream, not human, rose from the fire. The symbols on the walls flashed bright red, then turned to ash. The gate groaned. Cracks split it like glass. Behind her, footsteps pounded down the tunnel. Then a voice. "Isabella?" It was Edward, but his voice was full of fear. Not for himself, for her. Flames danced across the gate, growing wilder with every second. Smoke twisted upward like black serpents, curling around the bones of the structure. Isabella backed away, coughing, eyes stinging. She held her lantern high, heart racing. The walls trembled. Something ancient was dying. And then he appeared. Edward. He stumbled into the chamber, eyes wide, not glowing now, but full of pain. "I told you to run," he said, voice ragged. "You shouldn't have come here." Behind him, the others came, Arabella and her circle of the dead, but they didn't rush forward. They stood at the edges of the fire, their cracked skin burning, their mouths open in silent rage. Arabella pointed at Isabella. "You think you've won? You've only closed the door, child. You haven't destroyed what waits beyond it." Her voice turned sharp, cold as ice. "But he will never be whole again, not without the gate." Edward turned to Isabella, his jaw clenched. "She's right." "What do you mean?" Isabella asked. "I'm tethered to it, to the seed. It's why I can think, why I'm not like the others." He looked at the crumbling gate. "When it burns completely, I will too." Isabella's breath caught. "No, there must be another way." "There isn't," he said softly. The flames grew higher, the ceiling above groaned, the ground shook. Arabella shrieked and disappeared into the smoke, her followers scattering with her. The gate began to collapse. Edward stepped forward. "Izzy, if I stay, they will keep coming. If I go, you'll be safe." Tears streamed down her cheeks, "But I just got you back." He took her hand, his touch warm for the first time in days. "You never lost me. Not really." The final stone cracked. He smiled. "Remember me and live." Then he turned, walked into the fire, and vanished. The gate fell, the light died, and all was silent. Weeks passed. The fog lifted from Ravencross, slowly but surely. Birds returned to the skies. Children laughed again in the lanes. The sea was still restless, but it no longer whispered names. The villagers never spoke of what happened beneath the chapel. Most didn't even know. Isabella told them the storm damaged the foundation, that the crypt had collapsed. No one asked questions. But she knew. She had lost Edward a second time, and this time forever. Or so she believed. One quiet morning, she walked the cliffs where she had first seen him. The sea below was calm. A single gull cried overhead. She knelt and placed a bundle of white flowers on the edge. "For you," she whispered, voice trembling. As she turned to leave, a figure stepped out from behind the rocks. Tall, broad-shouldered, familiar. Her heart froze. It was Edward, but not quite. His eyes were clear, not red. His skin was warm, sun-kissed, not cold. His face held no shadow of the dead. "Edward?" she whispered. He smiled. "No, but close." She stepped back, breath caught in her throat. "What are you?" He looked at her with eyes full of ancient calm. "I am the memory of him, reborn." When the gate fell, something passed through. Not the darkness that Arabella wanted, something older, kinder. "You mean you're not him?" "I am what remained of him," he said. His love for you was stronger than the curse, strong enough to hold back the tide. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "So what now?" she asked softly. He looked out at the horizon. "Now I stay, with you. Not as a ghost, not as a monster, but as something new." And as the sun broke through the clouds, Isabella realized the truth. The dead may forget, but love remembers. And sometimes, it brings you back. In the quiet village of Ravencross, life slowly returned to its fragile peace. The shadows that once haunted the night receded, and the sea's whispers became gentle again. Yet beneath the surface, a new truth remained. One not of darkness, but of love's enduring power. Edward was lost to the world between life and death, but his memory, carried by Isabella's heart, became a force stronger than any curse. Through sacrifice, courage, and the deepest of bonds, they proved that even when the dead rise and the world falls apart, love can light the darkest path. The tale of Ravencross is a reminder that some things never truly vanish. Not fear, not pain, but also not hope. For in the end, love is the greatest magic of all. It remembers, it fights, and sometimes it brings us back from the brink of forever.
In the shadows of the night, where the